Hi class, my name is Bob Agan. Most of you know me as John. We've had our discussions on our forum post. Today I want to talk to you about euthanasia. Death is difficult for us to discuss. There's this mystery, there's this uncertainty that surrounds death. The reason is because quite honestly, we've never had anyone live and tell about it. So since death is difficult for us to talk about, euthanasia is also a difficult topic for us to talk about too. How do we even define euthanasia? Is euthanasia killing someone versus allowing someone to die naturally? Depending on your philosophical stance is going to determine your definition of this. And we see this in the writers, the people that we look to give us clarity of an understanding of what a true definition is. But through living wills, passive euthanasia is happening in hospitals today. And this is accepted by Christians and non-Christians alike most of the time. Since this is the case, it's my belief that passive euthanasia should not be something that's condemned since it's already been practiced in hospitals all around the world. So what is euthanasia? Well, we know it comes from the Greek word that means a good death. We also know Judith Boss wrote about this in Analyzing Moral Issues. We've read that definition. But we also know that Boss categorized euthanasia into 4 different categories. I want to focus on the 4th one just for a few moments, called passive voluntary euthanasia, because this is where living wills are. She says that this is actually a part of euthanasia. She calls it passive euthanasia. Living wills are basically part of advanced directives. Under advanced directives, you have living wills, do not resuscitate, various things that you can fill out ahead of time to give your healthcare professionals some guidance on how you would like for your care to be handled. This gives the patient a voice, whether they want to be on a ventilator, a feeding tube, different types of injections they can get. This is a good thing. But is euthanasia something new? No. We've been talking about euthanasia for years. The Romans and the Greeks had their thoughts on it. They were supporters of active euthanasia because they didn't see life as valuable and often were advocates of killing infants. We know that the Greeks, the ancient philosophers, not the Greeks, the ancient philosophers were also people that said some things about euthanasia. Aristotle, Plato, different ones like that. They weren't supporters of active euthanasia, they were supporters of passive euthanasia. We see Hippocrates, we see his stance on this through the Hippocratic Oath, which is what most of our physicians take today, where it says, "I will give no deadly medicine to anyone if asked, nor suggest any such a course." So we understand his stance on euthanasia. But here's what it comes down to. We have a problem with accepting death. Let's face it. Up to this point, death, the mortality rate is 100%. We are all going to die, but we have a hard time accepting that. So my question is, why do we delay the inevitable? If we appreciate God for being the giver of life, we should also honor God as the one who takes life. We know in Solomon says this in Ecclesiastes, where he says, hey, there's a time to be born and there's a time to die. By us prolonging life, are we ever starting to step outside of God's will for life and death? Culture has a lot to do with this. In our culture today, we are starting to reject death, and instead we're starting to be advocates of prolonging life. Angela Banjar, in her article in the Canadian Journal of Critical Care Nursing, spoke about this. She went all the way back from the 20s to the present time and showed how culture has constantly rejected death more and more and more. Death in the 20s was usually what happened in the home. The family was there, and it was an accepted thing. People died amongst their family, and later on friends would come by and pay their respects. To where in the 60s we see that funeral homes came into play, to where they started making the dead look alive by putting makeup on and fixing her hair. And today, in the 90s and so forth and so on to the present, we have gotten to the point a lot of times where we reject death completely. People are having closed casket ceremonies. People are being cremated. Nothing against these things, but just culture is continually pushing against death. So what's the cost? We know there's a financial cost. Yes, we've read about Medicare, the $55 billion they've spent, the impact that the baby boomers are going to have at one point. So we see there's a physical cost, but what about the spiritual cost? Why don't we honor God as the one who gives life and who is over life? We see Job says this. He says, in his hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind. Culture has a different viewpoint of that. And we know this because this is why they constantly are rejecting death. But I say let's live by the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jesus spoke about this in the Bible, in Matthew and in Luke. And it's a beautiful thing if we were to treat people the way that we would like to be treated. Professor Hare in a speech at Oxford University, speaks about this. He speaks about the golden rule of us treating others the way we would want to be treated. He speaks of a guy that was driving a gas tanker. There's a wreck. The tanker is on fire. The driver's stuck in the cab, and he's pleading with the bystanders to please hit him in the head and kill him before the fire consumes him. One of the bystanders actually did this, and he goes on to say, "But I do not know what happened in court afterwards." The most profound thing was the question that he asked afterwards, too. Ask yourself, as I have asked myself many times before, what would you do if you saw a man in this same situation? The case of euthanasia is far from closed. I'm aware of this. We'll talk about this for hundreds of years to come. And realize I'm not a supporter of active euthanasia. What we've been talking about today is simply passive euthanasia. See, passive euthanasia is something that gives a patient a voice into how they want their end-of-life care to go. Because I think all of us are on a pursuit to where we want a good death. And I think passive euthanasia is the way to do that. Thank you for listening. God bless you.